Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. I've made this video with my tongue firmly in my cheek, and the reason for it was a suggestion on an audiovisual forum that it would be a good thing if slideshow software could automatically add images to the beat of the music when we make a slideshow. Now this is not a great suggestion for a very simple reason. The synchronization of images to music is very often the be-all and end-all in a creative process to create an audiovisual presentation. It's certainly not something we're going to hand over to a computer and still expect a good result. Computers can create music with no help from humans, but think about it, how well has this turned out? The other thing that was surprising to me with this request was that it was made on a dedicated audiovisual forum. You would think that enthusiasts would politely say that this automation of a creative process is probably not a good way to go. But in the politically correct world we now live in, it means that this rarely happens. We seem so concerned that we may offend someone that many are reluctant to be honest. So what is the synchronization of images to music? Well, simply, it's where we introduce images on a timeline that matches the beat of the music, or in the case of more melodic music, the highs and lows of that music. Now there is a solution to this that I have discovered. I've found that I can use my eyes and my ears both at the same time. It's amazing how this works. It was also suggested on the forum in defense of the suggestion that some people don't have the time or the inclination to learn enough about the software to achieve good synchronization of music and images. Well, I hope the aircraft technician fixing the engines on the 747 I'm about to get on doesn't have the same defeatist attitude. If you can clap your hands in time to music, then you can synchronize images to music in a slideshow. Let me demonstrate my technique with Pictures to Exe, one that I've been using now for probably over 20 years. Most of the time it's the music that is the big decider where an image is placed on the music timeline. You'll find there are many sections of music where the notes climb or fall, and it's pretty obvious that something should be happening on screen in time with that. In other words, we change from one image to another. Your eyes and ears will tell you if you have it right, and if not, well, then we can move the image or the video that we're synchronizing to make sure it's perfect. So let me demonstrate the technique to do this in the best way that I've found, and I call it adding my images on the fly. What I've done here is drag a series of images down into the timeline, and I've added a piece of music. I've adjusted the volume of the music, but hopefully I've done that purely so I can talk over it as we're synchronizing the images to that music. A little tip before we start: once we've located the images that we're working on in a folder of our choice, we can lose the file tree on the left with Ctrl-G, and we can bring it back in the same way. Sometimes that can be helpful. So what we're looking at here is to synchronize all of these images to the music here. The music is called the Blue Danube, and I think many of you will be familiar with it. I'm going to make a start by just setting up my title first. You'll notice that I've got two images, one without the title, one with. Then I'll allow the image or the text to fade off the screen when the next image removes it. So I'm going to start my slideshow with an image rather than a blank. So I don't actually need it to come on screen in 2 seconds. So I'm going to click and drag that right the way down, and if you would rather, you can go into your slides and you can take that down to 0 in that little box at the top left. Back into the timeline. So what I've got to do is just move these out of the way just for a moment, put my cursor back, because I'm going to start and introduce my images on the fly. Now I can do that either using the insert key on the keyboard, or I can hit the little plus here. And each of these images, no matter where I've placed them, will be dragged down and dropped where I place them. So, as I was saying a few moments ago, I can use my eyes and my ears both at the same time. I can bring my cursor back, I can press play, and I'll use the little plus sign so you can see what I'm actually doing. Now instantly you can see I was doing some work there to make sure that I got those three images synchronized with the music. But it's always tricky when we start a slideshow because we need to get this part right before we can move on to the others. So at this stage I would take my cursor back and I would just listen and watch what I've done to make sure I've got this right. Now I think that's coming up just a little late, and perhaps maybe the 2-second fade is a little long too. So I'm just going to drop it back a little bit and drop that back just a tiny amount, put my cursor back there, hit the space bar, which is a keyboard shortcut to start playing, and I can watch and listen. And this one came up a little quickly, I'm going to suggest, so you can see the line when I click the tab. I can move it to the edge of that WAV file there and test it. And I'm going to suggest we've got the first three set up nicely. So at this stage we would be saving this as a project file to make sure that everything we've done is safely stored. Now look what I'm going to do with the rest of these images. I'm going to shoot them way up to the right hand end of my timeline, and when I come back they appear to be gone, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my cursor in this position. I'm going to poise over the little plus or the insert button. I'm going to start playing this. I'm going to watch in the mini player, and I'm going to insert the images on the fly. At any time I think I've got it wrong, I can stop and adjust them, but of course we can play the slideshow once or twice once we think it's complete, and any of them that are slightly off, you'll soon notice it. And one thing just before I start, I doubt I'm going to need to program the whole of this slideshow because that may be a little bit too long. I think you'll get the idea after a short time. I'm going to use the insert key on my keyboard this time. So just to make this complete, I'll push this back to the start, press play, get my finger poised over the insert button, listen to the music and do my best to synchronize my images to the Blue Danube. Now let me stop it at that position because I think I've got most of these pretty well placed. But it's only when we complete the show and we can play it over again full screen that we will see if we've got things absolutely right. But just for a moment, let me just put my cursor back there and press play once again, because when you actually insert the images on the fly, you don't see the slideshow quite the same as when it's playing normally like this. So let's just take a look at those next 5 slides and see what we think. Now I hope you'll agree that the process is pretty simple. Let me place my cursor in this position and we'll try one or two others, and once again I'll use the insert key, so as you hear a change to the music you'll see exactly where I place the image. Now I've stopped it at that point because I've probably got a good position here to increase the fade on screen of this particular image, because I need to hold for a few seconds because I cannot change to a new image, which is this one, until the music really calls for it. So if I wanted a longer fade here, I've got the opportunity to do that. But let me just put my cursor back and press play again, and we'll just watch just to make sure that my decision is about right. Now I've stopped it there after adding another image because this is a tricky little spot. I think there's probably a couple of areas that we may place the image, so I'm just going to check this out. Maybe it's a little bit loud. I hope I haven't got it set too loud for you. I'll just press play once again and we're just going to watch these two. And I think it's working pretty well. So I don't think I need to do very much more here. I think you get a pretty good idea of how this works, not forgetting, of course, every now and again, save over the top of your project file. I'll do another few seconds of this and then we'll call it a stop. So I'm going to put my cursor back to, let's put it back to that position so I get a feel for how it looks and sounds, and pressing play. Now I didn't add another image there. I was waiting to listen to exactly what the music was going to do, and that happens from time to time. But of course I can go back and press the spacebar and have another run at it. Now you can see I was a little bit too quick there. Let me move along. Now I left quite a gap there, so if I wanted to introduce a little bit of animation, wouldn't this be the perfect image to do that? Because I've got a little bit longer in seconds here, which the music demands. But I didn't get this one quite right, so we'll move it up out of the way and we'll try again. And perhaps the music there will allow me to drag the transition a little bit further to the right to extend it. One last look at those couple. Now I've stopped it there after putting these four into place because you can see there that the music was calling for these images a little bit sooner than it did further back, and it's the nature of the music which determines when the images need to be placed. And if I put my cursor back and we try this once more, let me just press play, and this time we'll just watch the next few. Well, that is adding images on the fly. Very easy to synchronize our images to the music. What we're trying to achieve when we create an audio visual, especially one which is predominantly made with still images and maybe pictorial in nature, is that we're trying to add audio and visual so that when we add the two together, the sum of the two parts actually is greater, and the way we do that is with careful synchronization of the images to music. Now when I use this method to synchronize my images to music, I find that sometimes I get those creative thoughts when I get to a piece of music, like you can see the peaks here, which lend themselves to these two images, so I switch the images to make them line up with the music. And then of course I've got a little bit of music here which seems to indicate that I've got to change the images reasonably rapidly, but I put just a little bit of animation into these images. But I think it's also important here that the animation goes in the same direction. This is more personal, I think, than a judgment on audiovisual in general. But if you have one image zooming out, another one zooming in, the next one zooming out, I find that a little bit jarring on the eye. So if I choose to have three images with a delicate zoom, they're likely to go the same direction, the same amount, and the same speed. Let me give you just a look at how this looks and sounds by putting my cursor into that position, and we'll press play. There we have the synchronization of slides to music. To bring this video to an end, let me just take you to the end of my sequence, because I felt the few dramatic storm pictures I had here just lent themselves nicely with the music. Look at the peaks, much higher than the preceding, and I'm trying to make use of a fade to black pretty quickly in time with the music. If I put my cursor in this position, I'll press play and we'll end our video at the end of our slideshow. And there we have it. If you've enjoyed this video, there are a number of others that I've created for Pictures to Exe slideshow software, and what you're viewing on my website screen here are actually sets of videos. There's quite a few videos within each of those categories. The address you need to come to is at the top left of the screen, www.beckhamdigital.com.au. All of the headings you can see here will encompass a number of short individual videos. We begin with what's new in Pictures to Exe 9. A quick start guide, knowing what you need to do and when you need to do it to produce a slideshow. But then we start to look at the more creative aspects with basic animation and slide styles, creating and using slide styles, and then you can move on to the advanced animation and 3D and transitions too. Adding and editing video clips is also now an important part of Pictures to Exe, and of course those creative audio-visual techniques. They're the sort of things that give our show a little bit of wow value, and not forgetting the important sound editing too. As well as creating video tutorials for Pictures to Exe, I also have quite a large number of video sets for Photoshop. One of the most well known is under the Creative Cloud banner, and a set of videos which I've called Photoshop for Photographers. And if you'd like to come along to Photoshop for Photographers, Part 1 is completely free for you to download. And I also create a number of videos for Lightroom users too. And if we skip across to the digital photography section and I click that option, we'll see that there's quite a number of other disciplines here: camera craft, learning how to use your camera, understanding exposure, good housekeeping on your computer, infrared photography, and a great set of tutorials on photographing glass. Come along and take a look.